Greetings, everyone, to the Win Via Trust Leadership Podcast. I am Mike Rabinowitz, and in this podcast, I speak directly with leaders and newsmakers to provide you with both practical guidance and fresh inspiration as you think about trust in your own leadership journey. I want to begin by thanking our audience for helping Win Via Trust rank in the top 10 for management podcasts on GoodPod since launch. Today, we are fortunate to talk with James Dancy, or Jim, as known to his friends, whom I serve on a common board and a real gentleman. He worked in the waste services industry for nearly 40 years and held executive operating positions for most of his career with Waste Management Incorporated. At different times, he was responsible for 26 states and 14 foreign countries and was the principal executive in charge of the state of Pennsylvania for waste management. He also oversaw international responsibilities while living in London. James is a proud graduate of St. Joseph's University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration. He is very gracious with his time in community efforts, including having served on the board of trustees for the Bucks County Community College for approximately 15 years. Jim, your career is extremely impressive. You overcame high levels of complexity and risks to create new markets for your company in the U.S. and Europe within a highly regulated industry. Before we go too deep in your career, please give us some background as how you started in the waste services industry.
Michael, it was very interesting. I joined a company in Philadelphia that was a public company back in the late 60s, early 70s. And the company was doing two very different things. It was basically in the construction materials business, so provided ready-mix concrete services as well as aggregate materials for the construction trades. In the waste services business, which back then they called the garbage business, I basically went into the waste services field because that appealed to me more than the construction services field. Now, we grew that business in over a 10-year period to $100 million and sold to Waste Management, and they bought the business in 1981. That's when I left Southeastern PA for the first time.
Interesting. And was there an event or a series of events that really raised the profile of your career so that you could obtain some of these executive positions?
Well, I think basically the industry was developing into more of a regional/national business. Prior thereto, it had really been a municipal business, with each town or city overlooking their own waste materials, as well as a mom and pop business. And as the third and fourth generation of families wanted to go off and do other things, there was a tremendous wave of acquisitions with a few large regional, which ultimately later on became national companies. That's how the explosive growth happened.
Gotcha. We're going to be talking more about your career, but given that the focus of our discussion is really around trust, and in our time working together, quite honestly, you've consistently demonstrated what trust and trustworthiness means all the time. So tell me what trust means to you.
Well, trust means to me, it means integrity, it means character, it means leadership, it means doing what you say you're going to do. Now, no one's perfect, so sometimes it doesn't always work out. So that's what trust means to me, that people realize that you will walk the talk and you will deliver on what you say you will deliver.
And how important has it been to establish trust with those that you worked with?
It was important. I mean, that was really the first thing that we had to do, because if we don't have trust, if we don't respect each other, we can't do anything.
Can you share a time when it seemed especially hard to build that trust and how you overcame it?
Well, there were several times, but one that sticks out immediately is when I went out to Oregon from Texas. The company at the time was having a hard time with what it was doing in Oregon. And basically, the leader there was just not showing the right decision-making ability, the right trust, the right character, and the right style. And they had to be replaced. So the hardest thing I had to do was to show people that I was different, that I wanted to be different, that I wanted to listen to them. They had to be comfortable with what I wanted to do and what I was sent to do. And I explained to them there was complete transparency as to we were not doing well. We were painted as the bad guy, and we weren't really. We were very legal and very above board. And we just had to convince everybody in the public that we were that way. The first step was convincing our employees that we were that way, because they were basically the ones that knew more people than I did in the state of Oregon. So basically, that's what it was. It was to have integrity, to be honest with people, even when they didn't want to hear the answer. Be honest with people, and do what you said you were going to do. And if you were wrong, you had to back up and choose a better path, to make yourself right. But it's those kinds of things that I think you have to do.
Now, all of us depend upon the waste services industry for our residences and our work, but it's probably a very misunderstood industry. Can
The
you tell
industry
me?
has changed dramatically in the last 50 years, Michael. It was basically a mom and pop, municipal driven industry. Every town had their open dump, if you will, and half of them on fire. There was Resource Conservation and Recovery Act in effect yet back. That didn't come into play until in the late 80s, early 90s. Basically, you had the tightening of the rules, and the government got more involved in terms of saying what was allowable and what wasn't. The first phase of it was an immense amount of consolidation, which came about through acquisition activities. There was no such thing as recycling. And the first thing that was recycled by commercial trash haulers was cardboard. And so you had this evolving trend toward what you see today in terms of more enlightened means of handling waste materials today than was available 30, 40 years ago.
It sounds like quite an operation. I'm just very curious because you had significant international efforts. And in an industry where reliability is paramount, how do you build a whole new business from scratch in a country like the UK and earn that local trust demanded by customers?
I was asked to go over to London, and you just can't show up and say, gee, here I am to work. I mean, their first question is, well, why don't we have Brits that can do your job? The company had already started, but it was growing rapidly through acquisition in those European countries. And basically, we were able to bring additional horsepower, if you will, to the management team to meet some of the demands of the growth. The companies, it's kind of interesting because each country has to be looked at separately, but basically some countries you could operate as a private company, as an American company, you can just operate. In other countries, depending on laws and so forth, and practices and customs and political customs, you had to have a partner. So our partner in the UK was one of the water companies, because at that point in time, and remember this is early to mid 90s, at that point in time, the European governments looked at the waste business almost as if it was a quasi-public utility. So almost like you would regulate an electric company or a water company. And our partner at the time for the UK was one of the water companies, one of the regional water companies. I won't get into any names or anything, but in France, we didn't need a partner. We were able to operate as Waste Management France, and Italy the same way. But a lot of countries, we had a partner that if you didn't have a partner, you couldn't operate. I was in 14 countries, and 10 of them in Europe and 4 not in Europe, 3 in the Far East and 1 in South America. Those countries all reported to the London office of the company that I worked for. London was in charge of everything outside of North America. You basically had to look at each country to see where you could operate with a partner or without a partner.
I see. So I'm sure you had some very difficult decisions to make throughout your career. Can you tell me one story perhaps that reveals where trust was not upheld and you had to respond to correct that?
Well, I hate to go back to the same example, but I will. In Oregon, there was absolutely no trust in the company by the local populace or the local dignitaries. The company was accused of breaking laws at the time, antitrust laws, which it was not. I mean, it was the largest company vis-a-vis acquisition in Oregon, in Portland primarily. Portland at that point in time was comprised of several small haulers. They would have, when I say small, I'm talking about a trash hauler that had 3 trucks or 4 trucks or 5 trucks. Well, what was funny to me was, and I can see me laughing now, what was funny to me was 7 or 8 of these haulers operated out of the same yard. Well, if you operated from the same yard, you must have been friendly. You must have shared customer lists. You must have backed each other up in terms of bids and proposals. I was sent to bring character and definition, all the good attributes into Oregon principally. And I thought to myself that we're being attacked by all fronts, the newspaper, the Oregonian, council, John Q. Public, etc. And we haven't done anything wrong. So I had to tell them we were doing what was right. We were not violating any laws, that we operated by ourselves. We went through all the steps. And over a period of a year and a half, I was able to show them that we were actually the good guy or good guys. I don't want to paint a bad picture about the other competitors, but if I was a district attorney or if I was an attorney for the U.S. government, you could have a field day with about 50 of these haulers who were basically breaking every antitrust law on the books. Obviously, it wouldn't be big enough potatoes for somebody to spend their time doing that at that point in time. But I said, we're not the problem. So there are many of those types of examples, but that does come to mind.
And your industry, besides the acquisition, consolidation, also integrated a lot of new technology. And we see it continually now. How did you work with your haulers to get them to continue to improve efficiency and delay any concerns about losing their job? I mean, how does that all work in your industry and with your management style?
Well, I think that, and I've been retired and thank you for that introduction. I've been retired for 15 years and a lot has changed and developed in that period of time, obviously. I think the reverse is what has happened. The industry and all the changes and rules and regulations have driven more employment because what has happened is you now have separate routes for recycling and separate routes for trash, if you will, or garbage, as I still like to call it. Back in those days, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, you didn't. Let's say you had less. So what you have now is you have people that all they do is collect recycling, or all they do is collect trash. So I think it's actually created more employment than less in terms of instructing people and educating them. I think we had to do, and what the industry had to do, was basically explain with transparency, we have to abide by the laws. We're a public company. We cannot be doing anything that's going to get in trouble. And you basically have to remind people that's why we do what we do. That's why we collect this versus that, or this way, that way, etc. I think it's just a continuing education, a continuing discussion, for want of a better word, with the employees. Just meet with the employees periodically and frequently, be honest, and explain why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And as you were increasing in your responsibilities and rising in the organization, did you have a mentor or a set of advisors that were really helpful? And what characteristics made them helpful, if you did?
Well, I don't know that I had any advisors per se. I did have the COO of Waste Management liked me, for want of a better term, and he was young. He was my age, and he was a fellow that could trust. He always delivered on what he said. And I always made sure I tried to pattern myself as to how he did things. So his example was important to me. He always seemed to be the fellow that asked me to go places and do things and, fix this or fix that or improve this or improve that. So I guess that would be the way I would feel about that. The president and CEO of the company's name was Phil Rooney. He was always someone that I emulated in terms of I was always impressed with his character, his integrity, and how he handled himself and his range of personality. He could talk to the board and executive officers. He could talk to somebody on the back of a garbage truck, and very comfortably, everywhere in between. Not that there is an in between, but everywhere in between.
Yeah. Given that a lot of your role was to problem solve and correct issues for the company, what was your style? I mean, you would come into a group, introduce yourself, and then how would you work through the issues?
Well, what I would do is get the key management people into a small, short meeting and say, look, here's who I am. This is what I've done. I'm in charge. At this point, I was sent here to do this. These are the things we have to do. Doesn't have to be the way it is starting now. We change starting now, and that's what we did. And I'll take any and all suggestions and ideas. I may have said earlier, I'm very proud that very few of those people in several different stops along the way over a 30-year period had to be changed. They just needed different direction, different leadership. And once they were able to get behind that, they were able to, kind of get on the team and get things done. They just had bad leaders, just weaker leaders, weaker management, weaker leadership.
Yeah, well, leadership is a very important trait and skill, and obviously it's something that you've harnessed.
And you can't legislate. You really can't legislate that either, and you can't line people up against the wall and say, be enthused. It doesn't work that way.
Now, we've had a far-ranging discussion, and I've asked a lot of questions, but there may be one question that you feel that maybe I should have asked you that'll help guide the audience today in terms of how they use trust in their own leadership journey.
Well, I think we've talked a lot about different things, Michael, and they all come back to the ability that people trust you, that they're comfortable with you, that you have the range of personality that you just can't come off like someone who can't relate to them. In your style, you have to come off, conduct yourself is a better way to put it. Conduct yourself in a way that people are comfortable talking to you about the pros and cons and comfortable talking to you about their ideas. And some are good, some are very good, and some are very bad. But, it all depends. And you have to listen. You have to be patient, and you have to have a lot of transparency in terms of being there for them. And I've always thought that people have always asked me what I thought my strengths and weaknesses were. And I really don't know how to answer that question and never did know how to answer that question. I always thought that I had the range of personality that I could make a presentation to the board of directors and principal executive officers. And at the same time, I could jump in a cab of a garbage truck and be very comfortable and talk very comfortably with whoever was driving the truck and everything in between. I always thought that was the important thing for me, was the range of personality.
Wow. Well, you've offered us a lot of insights today, Jim. I want to thank you for an excellent discussion today. This is Mike Rabinowitz on the Win Via Trust Leadership Podcast. I'm asking everyone, please remember to subscribe to future podcasts and blogs at winviatrust.com. And thanks, everyone, for joining. And thanks, Jim, for a great discussion.